The wind came off the mountain like a whip, dragging snow across the barren plains, slicing through trees and ribs alike. The sky above was a muted gray, as if the sun had given up trying. On that lifeless stretch of land, where nothing should have moved, a lone figure limped across the snow-crusted earth, coat torn, leg bleeding, steps staggering but relentless. Ransom Halt wasn't headed anywhere. He wasn't even sure he was walking anymore or just falling forward over and over, letting the cold carry him. His rifle hung uselessly across his back, a useless tool now that the men who'd shot him were dead or gone. He hadn't stayed to find out. All he knew was the woods were thinning, the wind louder, and death, well, death was close. He could smell it. Then he saw her. A girl, no more than 9, bent over a patch of frozen ground, a rusted shovel in her raw red hands. The blade struck the dirt and bounced. She gritted her teeth and struck again, over and over, like it wasn't her first time failing, but she hadn't yet learned how to give up. Snow had gathered in her unkempt hair, her small boots soaked to the stitching. She didn't look up until he was nearly upon her. Her cheeks were smeared with dirt and tears. Her eyes were wide, not afraid but hollow in that way grief leaves a face. Ransom stopped, drawing a shaky breath, hand hovering near his revolver out of habit more than need. She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "My mama died today," she said, voice flat, like it was something she'd already said out loud 100 times. He said nothing. She blinked, swiped her nose with the sleeve of a threadbare coat, then added, "Can I spend a day with you, rancher?" Ransom's first instinct was to turn, walk away. He didn't want company, didn't want questions, and sure as hell didn't want reminders of what he'd lost. But the words wouldn't come. He just stared at her. Thus, his little ghost with mud on her knees and too much weight in her voice. The shovel slipped from her fingers, landing softly in the snow. She sat down beside it, slow, like she didn't care anymore whether she finished the hole or not. Her lips were starting to turn blue. "I don't bite," she said, then after a long pause, "Not unless I'm hungry." Ransom exhaled through his nose, low and hard, and scanned the small clearing. Behind her, a bundle lay covered in a wool blanket stiff in the snow. The grave wasn't done, but the death was real. He shifted on his bad leg, pain flashing like lightning in his thigh. "You can't stay out here," he muttered. She shrugged. "Ain't got nowhere else." He walked past her and picked up the shovel. The handle was splintered. Useless thing. Still, he drove it into the earth with more weight than she could muster. The ground was hard as rock, frozen deep. Every push of the blade sent jolts up through his chest, his leg nearly buckling. She sat back and watched him without a word, hands curled between her knees. It took an hour, maybe 2, time blurred with sweat and snow. The grave wasn't deep, not deep enough, not really, but the ground had given all it would. Ransom wiped his brow and straightened, breath heavy. "You want to?" he asked, not finishing the question. The girl shook her head and stood, walking over to the bundle. She knelt, placed her hand on the blanket, held it there a moment, then stood again, arms at her sides. He picked up the body and lowered it gently into the hole. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, just stood there with the wind blowing her hair sideways, watching as he covered her mother with frozen dirt. When it was done, he packed the last layer of snow down with the back of the shovel. "You hungry?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. She nodded once, slow. "I'm tired too." He helped her up onto the hose, pulling himself up behind her with a groan. The pain in his leg was worse now, and the wind was rising. He didn't look back at the grave as they rode into the trees. His cabin stood alone, hidden among pine and shadow, a sloped roof sagging under snow. He dismounted with a wince, helping her down with stiff fingers. She followed him through the door, cautious but unafraid. Inside was dim, warm only near the fireplace. A bear pelt covered most of the floor, and a cast-iron pot sat cold atop a black stove. Dust hung in the corners. It was a place built for one man and his ghosts. "Sit," he said. She obeyed, curling into a chair too big for her small frame. Her teeth chattered. He threw logs into the hearth and lit the flame. In silence he worked, baking stale bread, heating broth that smelled more like salt than soup. When he placed the bowl in front of her, she didn't thank him, but she did eat, every bite like she was proving something. "What's your name?" he asked after a while. She didn't answer, just stared into the fire, spoon halfway to her mouth. "All right," he muttered. "Don't matter." She pointed at the wall behind him. "Is that your daughter's?" Ransom turned. Hanging from a hook was a small wool coat, lavender once, now sun-faded. He hadn't touched it in years. She was about my size, the girl said softly. He didn't respond. I like the fire, she added after a while, makes everything not so quiet. He nodded, but didn't look at her. The silence returned. She fell asleep curled near the fire, the too small coat pulled over her like a blanket. Ransom sat across from her in his worn armchair, one boot off, pressing a rag to his wound. He watched the flickering light dance over her face, softening the angles of her grief. It was wrong, he thought, letting her in, letting anyone in. The world took what you loved and gave nothing back. Best to stay alone, safer, quieter. But he didn't wake her, didn't carry her out. He sat and listened to the crackle of wood and the faint, steady sound of her breathing. The next morning, she was gone. He jolted upright, nearly tripping over the chair. The coat lay folded by the hearth, her boots were missing, the door was cracked open, cold spilling in. Outside, he found her in the clearing behind the cabin. She was gathering firewood, arms full of crooked sticks, dragging them across the snow with grim determination. You planning on running off or freezing to death? He asked, walking up. She looked over. I was gonna help. You don't have to, she shrugged. Don't have nothing else. He took half the load from her arms. You should have told me, thought a bear took you. She squinted up at him, serious. If a bear ever does, you better shoot it. He chuckled, just once, and nodded. Fair enough. That night, they shared beans in silence again. She asked if she could stay one more day, just one. Why? He asked. 'Cause it's warm, she said, and the quiet's not so scary with someone else here. He didn't say yes, didn't say no either. Each day bled into the next. He found himself teaching her things. How to chop kindling, how to set snares along the tree line. She learned fast, with a solemn kind of focus. She never whined, never asked for anything more than warmth and food. He noticed her fingers tracing the dust along the mantel where his daughter's photograph used to sit. She never asked about it, but one evening, he caught her staring at the empty space like she could feel something still living there. She started talking more. My mama made soup with potatoes and bacon fat, she said one night. I ain't got either, he replied. That's okay. Yours don't taste bad. He watched her tuck the too small coat tighter around herself. She hadn't let it go since that first night. She asked questions too, careful ones. Were you in the war? He nodded. Union side. Did you kill people? He nodded again. Too many. She didn't look away, just said, my papa died in it. Mama said the war ate him alive. He didn't know what to say to that. Sometimes, late at night, she would hum. Not a song he knew, just a soft string of sounds, barely above breath. It soothed something in him he didn't know was still raw. He found himself listening for it, waiting. One morning, he found her sitting at the edge of the porch, staring at the rising sun. You're awful quiet today, he said. I had a dream, she murmured. Mama was warm again, said she missed me. He nodded. Dreams do that, trick you. She looked up at him, her face unreadable. You dream about your girl? Sometimes. What's her name? Ransom hesitated. Emily. Emily, she repeated, like it was a prayer. They didn't say anything more. The wind rustled through the pines. The snow was softer now, melting at the edges. That night, she fell asleep early. Ransom sat beside her, staring into the flames. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, she was here. She was safe, and for the first time in years, the silence in the cabin didn't feel so lonely. It felt like something else, maybe the start of something trying to grow in frozen ground. He glanced toward her sleeping form. Just one day, she'd said, but she hadn't left yet. The wind howled through the pines again that morning, though not as sharp as before. The worst of winter had passed, but the cold still seeped in through the logs. Ransom Halt rose early, bones stiff and shoulder aching from an old wound made worse by the storm. He pushed open the cabin door and let in a gust of air that carried with it the scent of pine, smoke, and the distant hush of melting snow. The girl was already outside. She had a twig broom in hand and was sweeping snow from the porch with focused intensity. Her cheeks were flushed pink, her breath visible in little puffs. She didn't see him at first, didn't know he was watching. There was something in the way she moved, precise, deliberate. Ransom recognized it, that quiet resolve people wore when they had nothing left to fall back on but themselves. He stepped down and joined her. Wordlessly, he picked up a bundle of kindling and began stacking it by the woodpile. She glanced over, nodded once, and returned to sweeping. It had become a rhythm between them, this silent collaboration, like they were rebuilding something they hadn't yet named. Inside, the cabin had taken on a new feeling. The chair across from his was no longer empty, a blanket now always draped over the hearth bench. A second mug sat drying beside his own. The girl didn't speak of staying, but she never mentioned leaving either. That afternoon, Ransom showed her how to trap snow hares. They trekked into the woods, him leading, her careful to place her boots exactly where his had gone. She asked questions about snares, about where to look, about how to know when something was still alive inside a trap. "Don't panic," he told her. "Go slow. Always go slow." She didn't say much else, only watched and mirrored his every motion. By the time they returned, the sky had dimmed and the clouds were hanging low again. She had caught her first rabbit, small, shivering, nearly dead from fright. Ransom broke its neck clean and quick. She didn't flinch. That night the rabbit meat simmered in the pot, and the girl sat cross-legged near the fire, eyes reflecting the flames like polished amber. Ransom poured hot water into 2 chipped mugs and handed her one. She wrapped her fingers around it like it was a treasure. After a long silence, she said, "You dream loud." Ransom looked at her, startled. "What?" "Last night, you were talking, screaming kind of, but not words." He rubbed his face, tired. "Happens sometimes." She stared at him over the mug. "Who were you dreaming about?" He hesitated, the fire crackling between them. "My daughter, Emily." The girl nodded like she already knew. "Was she small like me?" He nodded. "Smaller for a time." "Did she die from the sickness?" "Yes." She turned her eyes back to the flames. "My mama did too. Not the same one maybe, but it still burns. Inside, I mean." Ransom felt something shift in the air. The way she said it wasn't dramatic or soft, it was just truth. Heavy, unmoving, like a stone dropped into a still pond. "Sometimes," she continued, "I think I still hear her voice, when I'm asleep, but I don't want to stop hearing it, even if it hurts." He set down his mug and leaned forward. "It never stops hurting, but you get used to carrying it." She didn't reply, only stared at the fire with a look older than her years. The next few days passed like smoke through a chimney, thin, slow, and rising. They worked side by side. She learned how to gut fish, how to hang meat, how to sharpen the edge of a dull blade. Ransom taught her everything in short sentences and steady movements. She never needed much repetition. She learned because she had to. That was a language he understood. One morning, while stacking fresh logs near the stove, she found something wrapped in oilcloth wedged behind a loose board. She pulled it out with 2 hands, a locket, old and tarnished, hanging on a thin chain. She opened it slowly. Inside were 2 faces, a young girl, around 6, with Ransom's eyes, and a woman with kind, soft features. The girl stared at it in silence, then looked up as Ransom entered the room. "Was this Emily?" she asked, holding it out. He stopped cold, his face twitched, something between pain and longing. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "You kept it hidden?" He stepped forward and took it gently from her hand. "Didn't want to see it every day, didn't want to forget either." She reached out and folded his hand around it. "Then maybe it shouldn't be hidden." That evening, when the fire was down to its last flicker, she placed the locket on the mantel beside the faded photograph, said nothing. Just left it there like it belonged. Ransom said nothing either, but, when he passed by it later, he didn't move it. It was on the 4th day of their quiet rhythm that something shifted. The storm came in fast, snow rolling in heavy sheets across the hills. The wind shrieked through the trees. Ransom secured the shutters, checked the roof from the inside, and stoked the fire to full blaze. The girl sat at the window, watching the flakes fall. "You ever been caught in one of these?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Once. That's when Mama got sick." He poured water into a pot and added dried herbs. "This one won't get you." Later, just as they were settling into the calm of another firelit night, the horses outside stirred. At first, Ransom thought it was just the wind, but then came the crunch of snow under boots. He rose fast, grabbing the rifle by the door. The girl froze, eyes wide, body still. Someone was approaching. A shadow flickered across the window, then a knock, sharp, twice. Ransom opened the door slowly, gun ready. Standing in the snow was a man wrapped in a weathered hide cloak. His skin was the color of oak bark, his long black hair braided with feathers. He wore no expression, his eyes were sharp, ageless. "Hawk," Ransom muttered. The man nodded once, stepping inside. The girl backed up to the hearth. "He's a friend," Ransom said to her, lowering his rifle. "Sort of." Hawk glanced at the girl but said nothing. He shook snow from his coat and moved toward the fire. He produced a leather pouch from beneath his cloak and handed it to Ransom. "Powdered root," Hawk said. "For the leg." Ransom took it, muttered thanks. Hawk turned his eyes back to the girl. "She's the one?" Ransom bristled. "What do you mean?" "Bandits raided a homestead east of here, 2 valleys over, left nothing but a trail of blood. One girl missing." "Her?" The girl stared back silent. "She hasn't said where she came from," Ransom said. Hawk stepped closer, crouched before her. "You run from something?" She held his gaze. "They shot my mama. I buried her. I didn't run. I walked." Hawk studied her for a long moment. "You got steel. Good." Then he turned back to Ransom. "They'll be looking for her." Ransom's stomach clenched. He nodded once. "I figured." That night, Hawk stayed by the fire, saying little. He slept near the door, like he always did, half warrior, half shadow. The girl watched him carefully, but asked no questions. In the early hours, Ransom stepped outside to clear his head. Snow blanketed the world in stillness. The weight of the news pressed on him heavier than the cold. He felt Hawk appear beside him without a sound. "She's not yours," Hawk said. "She's nobody's," Ransom replied. Hawk nodded. "But she's alive because of you. I didn't ask for that. Neither did she." They stood in silence for a while. "You send her away now. The next men won't be like me," Hawk said. "Winter or wolves will take her, or worse." Ransom's jaw tensed. "I don't have room in my life for another ghost." "You already made room. You just don't want to see it." Back inside, Ransom watched the girl sleep. She had taken to curling up near the fire, wrapped in the lavender coat like it was a shield. Her face was peaceful for once. The weight on her brow had softened. The next morning, she found him outside carving wood. His hands moved with purpose, knife sliding along grain. She stood beside him and watched in silence. "What are you making?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Chair." "Why so small?" "For someone about your size." Her eyes flicked to him, lips parted in quiet surprise. "You said just one day," he said, "but that was a while ago." She blinked hard. "I thought maybe you hadn't noticed." "I notice everything," he said. She hesitated, then whispered, "I don't want to go." "I know." She watched him carve for a long time. When the legs were shaped, she touched one lightly. "It's crooked," she said. "So are most things that matter." She smiled for the first time. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warm. The locket on the mantel gleamed in the light. Outside, the storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the trees. And for the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a home learning how to breathe again. The wind had calmed by the time the sun edged above the hills. The snow no longer fell in violent swirls, only drifted gently, as if unsure whether to stay or leave. Ransom Halt rose from his cot with the slow, stiff grace of a man shaped by years of hard winters and harder memories. His legs still throbbed, his shoulder ached from the old wound Hawk had treated with powdered root, but he moved with steady purpose. The girl was at the table, scraping dried rabbit sinew into thread. Her hands worked with careful rhythm, her hair tied back in a loose knot. She looked up only once as he passed, and in that single glance, he saw something that hadn't been there when she first came. A faint trust, a flicker of comfort that hadn't dared surface before. He poured himself water from the kettle and leaned against the window frame, watching the white world stretch out beyond the cabin. The trees stood solemn and patient. Somewhere out there, Hawk had disappeared again, vanished like he always did when his part in things was done. He came and went on the wind, like smoke. But he left behind more than herbs this time. He left behind a warning. "They'll come," he had said. "Not all men forget their prey." Ransom hadn't spoken of it to the girl, but the truth lingered in the cabin like frost on glass. He knew those men, bandits, desperate cowards who'd found cruelty easier than labor. The kind of men who took what they wanted and burned what they left behind. They'd seen something in the girl, maybe what she'd seen in herself. Smallness, vulnerability, but they'd underestimated her. He had too at first. Now she stood at the doorway, staring out over the ridge. "You see something?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just listening." He nodded. She listened now. Not for voices or footsteps, but for the shift in wind, the way a crow flew too fast, the way silence grew suddenly deep. She had learned more than how to trap and clean. She had learned how to notice, and how to keep breathing through it. He took her out past the barn that day, led her to a rise above the frozen creek. A row of battered cans sat on a fallen log, half buried in snow. She looked up at him, confused. "What's this?" "Practice." He handed her the rifle, a small .22, light enough for her to handle, heavy enough to teach. She hesitated, then squared her stance like he'd shown her when they hunted. "Don't close one eye," he told her. "Keep both open. Breathe steady." She lined up the shot. The gun cracked. The nearest can flew off the log. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. She fired again. Missed. Again. Hit. She grinned, wide and crooked. He nodded. "Good." "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked. "Because next time, I might not be near." She didn't smile at that, only nodded and reloaded. Later they worked the land together. The sun had warmed the ground just enough to begin clearing the garden. Ransom handed her a spade. She dug with her usual quiet intensity. At one point she asked about the seeds stored in the corner of the barn. "You think they'll grow?" "Maybe," he said. "If we stay long enough." She looked at him, dirt on her cheek, her mouth a thin line. "You mean, if I stay?" He didn't answer at first. That night, after they'd eaten, she curled up in her usual place by the fire. The lavender coat hugged her thin frame. She had grown used to its sleeves riding short up her arms, never once complaining. He watched her sleep for a long time, the fire casting slow shadows across the floor, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, reasons deeper than logic or words, he whispered, "You can stay forever." She stirred but didn't wake. As the words hung in the room like heat from the fire. The peace didn't last. 3 days later they came. Ransom heard them before he saw them, the snap of branches, the unnatural silence that pressed in behind them. He moved like muscle memory, ushering the girl to the back of the cabin, pressing a rifle into her shaking hands. "Don't shoot unless you have to," he said, "but don't wait too long if you do." She nodded, her jaw was set, though her hands trembled. He stepped outside. 3 men stood at the edge of the trees. One wore a red scarf, another had a long coat stained at the hem. The leader, tall, broad, eyes like old ash, carried a repeating rifle across his chest and a knife strapped to each thigh. "We come for the girl," he called. Ransom didn't respond. "She was with a woman, you know the one, dead now, ain't she?" Still silence. "She saw us, heard us, that's a problem." Ransom leveled his rifle. "She's under my roof," he said. "That makes her mine." The leader tilted his head, amused. "You sure you want to die for a stray?" Ransom's voice was low, deadly. "You sure you want to die trying to take her?" The first shot was his, fast, clean. It caught the man with the red scarf in the leg. He dropped with a scream. The other 2 scattered. The one in the coat took cover behind a stump, firing wildly. The leader vanished into the trees, moving like a shadow. Ransom ducked behind the well, returning fire. Bullets sang past his head. His shoulder flared with pain. Wood splintered. Then, movement near the cabin. The girl, rifle in hand, breath held, stood behind the door. She saw the man circling to the left. Her grip tightened. She fired. The shot caught the man in the coat in the side. He dropped hard, groaning. Ransom looked back, stunned. Her eyes met his, shocked but steady. Only one left. The leader reappeared suddenly, rushing from the tree line, blade drawn. Ransom didn't have time to reload. The man tackled him hard, sending them both to the ground. They wrestled in the snow, fists and elbows, knife flashing. Ransom's strength was failing fast. The blade nicked his ribs, shallow but sharp. Then a blur moved through the trees. Hawk, silent and fast as wind. He struck the bandit with the butt of his tomahawk, sending him sprawling. Before the man could rise, Hawk had his foot on his chest, blade poised. Ransom struggled to his feet. "Don't." Hawk looked up. "He needs to see what happens when you lose everything and still get back up." The man glared, bleeding. "You don't scare me." "You should," Ransom said. They let him live. Barely. By morning, The bandits were gone, limping into the forest, their pride left behind in the snow. Ransom sat on the porch, wrapping his ribs with a strip of cloth. The girl sat beside him, silent. "You were brave," he said. "I was scared." "Being scared and doing it anyway, that's braver than most." She looked down at the rifle across her knees. "I didn't want to shoot him. I know. But I'm glad I did." He nodded. The cabin was quiet again that evening. Hawk had left as silently as he'd arrived. The girl stood by the mantel staring at the photograph and the locket beside it. She didn't touch them, just watched them, thoughtful. "Do you think they'd like me?" she asked softly. Ransom stood beside her. "I think they'd love you," he said. She smiled, slow and real. Spring came on fast after that. The snow melted into soft ground. The creek rushed again. Birds returned to the branches, singing like they hadn't in years. Ransom and the girl built a small garden. She picked wildflowers and wove them into bundles to hang from the rafters. Their meals grew warmer, their silences less heavy. One day, she led him to the rise above the creek, the same place where she'd learned to shoot. There, they built a cross for her mother. He carved her name into the wood with his hunting knife. The girl added a small flower at the bee. Pressed into the earth, blooming with spring. She looked up at him. "She's not cold anymore." "No," he said. "She's not." A week later, he found her brushing the pony near the barn, an old thing, stubborn and half-blind. She'd named it Clover. She climbed onto the saddle with ease, reins in hand. "You going somewhere?" he asked, half-teasing. "Just a ride," she said. "Up the ridge. I'll walk with you." They moved side by side up the trail. The sky burned with gold and orange. The trees whispered. The world, for once, felt quiet without feeling empty. At the top, she looked out over the valley. "Do you think I'll forget her?" she asked. "No. But it won't hurt the same, will it?" "No, it'll still hurt. But the pain changes. It becomes something you live with. Something that reminds you they mattered." She was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, "You still miss Emily?" "Every day." She nodded. "I think she'd be proud of you." Ransom's throat tightened. He said nothing. They rode down slowly, the light fading behind them. That night she slept by the fire again. The lavender coat had been patched in places. It still didn't fit right, but it was hers now, in every way that mattered. Ransom watched her for a long time. He didn't need to say it again. She was already home. If this story moved you, if you felt the chill of the snow, the fire of vengeance, and the warmth of found family, don't let it end here. Hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more emotional Western tales that stay with you long after the credits roll. Share this with someone who still believes in redemption and the power of quiet courage.